Hi guys, James here. Thank you for coming to watch. And today is a video I've been really excited to do the whole year, to be honest. And I've only just got around to doing it. Got myself one of these beautiful Epiphone metallic gold Les Pauls. It's standard 50s. And if you've been on this channel before, you might have noticed that I have a Gibson standard 50s, but with P90s. And I thought a few things. First of all, I wanted to see where Epiphone have got to this year, because they've clearly made an effort to improve a lot of things in this last year. Secondly, I wanted to have a test bed for humbuckers, and this is a guitar which I'm comfortable to change the pickups on frequently to see how they sound. And I wanted to give you guys a chance to see that difference between the Gibson and the Epiphone. You know, there's a huge price difference. The Epiphone is about a quarter of the price on average than the Gibson. So, you know, it's no one else's business what you want to spend on a guitar. But, you know, if you want to build up a whole collection of different guitars, maybe you don't want to buy Gibsons for each one, or, you know, it's just an occasional guitar. Or more importantly, I think this could be a fantastic gigging guitar, but we have to see how it plays first and what the tone is like. And, you know, it's important when you're gigging that it's a guitar you're comfortable to have out in open. You know, I think people forget that. Most people are gigging not in, you know, huge stadiums and arenas with roadies. They are getting themselves down to a club, a pub, and, you know, who's looking after their stuff? Well, sometimes no one. If you've got to pop to the loo, you got to pop to the loo. So do you want your £5 Gibson custom shop sitting around? Probably not. So we want to find out, is this Epiphone the best gigging machine? And we'll get to that in a minute. So here's the way this video is going to work. I've got this beautiful Gibson here, and I thought the interesting comparison would be physically between these two guitars. Let's see how they look compared to each other. Let's see how they feel. But this has P90s, this has humbuckers, so it wouldn't make much sense to compare like that. So we will compare my R9. It's the other Les Paul that I have. And it will be relevant because, yes, we can't necessarily compare a custom shop Gibson to an Epiphone in terms of how they're going to sound right now. But as I said, this Epiphone is going to be a test bed for pickups, and the first set of pickups I've managed to get are the custom buckers from this R9, not those ones, but other ones that I've bought. So I bought another pair. I thought that'd be really exciting, that you could have an Epiphone body if it's lovely to play and if it's good enough to play, and then you can have some Gibson pickups in there. So if you stick around on the channel for a few weeks, subscribe to the channel, you shall see that come out in a few weeks' time. First of all, I just want to get sort of more confident in terms of changing the pickups. So let's talk about this guitar. I love Epiphones. I've got a great history with them. Although my first guitar was a Fender Strat and I've still got it, my second guitar was a second-hand Epiphone Sg that I bought for £200 at a pawn shop, or it was a, I can't remember what it was called, but anyway, it was just one of these chain ones that we've got around here in London. I went in there and saw this beautiful cherry red Sg. I don't even think I knew what the name was. I was about 13 years old, and I fell in love with it, and I had that, I'd saved up my pocket money, £200, so I managed to get that. That guitar stayed with me for my whole teenage years. And when I sort of fell out of playing guitar when I was about 19 or 20 and I went off to university, I sold that guitar, which unfortunately I've always regretted. It just had the perfect neck for me and I just always loved it. And at that point, I didn't know anything about pickups and tone. And you know, I was using a pod, I was using a tiny little Marshall practice amp forever, so it wasn't a tube amp. But that's by the by. So I've wanted to see how Epiphone are doing now, all these years later. I had no problem with my Epiphone back then. It always worked. It always sounded good for me. So this year I did an Epiphone Sg review already, and I love that guitar. I've kept that. That's the guitar I actually bought to keep somewhere else, at another house, so that I've got something to play when I go there, and I wanted an Sg for that. I just think it's a lovely guitar to play. So I am nowadays a bit more of a Les Paul fan than an Sg fan, so I wanted to keep this Epiphone Les Paul at home. And as I said, there's so many reasons to have bought it. I love Goldtops and I wanted to change the pickups. So anyway, let's get into it. What are the comparisons to be made with the Gibson that is next to me? Well, let's put them side by side. First of all, the headstock. Let's go from top to bottom. The headstock now on the Epiphone is remarkably similar to the Gibson. It never used to be, of course, we all know that. Now, the Gibson one is a bit sharper. It's a little bit smaller, maybe slightly more attractive shape. But not many people are going to notice that from a distance. Now the proportions on the Epiphone guitars are so much better than they used to be. One thing I would say, though, is the flatter sort of shape down here. It's sort of like a duck bill, you know. And here on the Gibson, it tapers a lot more quickly and sharply down back into the nut. So the nut width on the Gibson is a tiny, tiny fraction bigger than the Epiphone. You can see that on the specs. But the Gibson neck feels a little bit more slender. And that's just because this gets in the way of your hand a little bit at the top, the Epiphone, and the Gibson one doesn't. It's all out of the way and you don't even think about it. So that's the first thing to say. Secondly, I like the tuners on both. The Gibson ones have a slightly deeper yellower colour as if they're vintage. The Epiphone ones don't. But I'm glad to say they've gone for much nicer tuners than on the Sg that I bought, which was sort of like little button shaped ones. They weren't nice at all. These ones say Epiphone Deluxe, and I think these ones say Gibson Deluxe. They do. But they're both exactly the same shape tuners on the back. I would not be surprised if they're probably pretty much the same thing. On the back of this Gibson, you have made in USA. It's fair enough. This one you have made in China. Not a problem. Apart from that, I'm really happy with this Epiphone, and I don't see it racked up against all my other guitars, most of which cost me a lot more, and I definitely don't sit there thinking, oh God, I wish I hadn't bought that Epiphone. You know, it looks good. So let's go down to the neck, the binding, the shape, everything. I would say the neck on the Gibson is a little bit more comfortable. It seems to have a little bit more of a shape to it. The Epiphone has more of a half baseball bat feeling to it. It's big. It's a big, big neck. The Gibson one just has, it must be tapered. It must have like sort of a composite shape because it is not, doesn't feel just, it feels like you can really dig in here. The Epiphone one is much more of a big, chunky shape. I'm not saying that the Gibson one is small. It's not at all. You know, these are vintage style necks, and that's one of the reasons you buy these guitars. But the feeling on here is a little bit less comfortable. I don't think it would be a deal breaker for many people, so it's not a huge negative. It's just an observation, really. The fretboard is actually really nice on the Epiphone. It's got lovely grain to it, nice texture. It's smooth. But you can feel the wood grain, which is a nice thing, I think. The inlays are not as deep in colour. They're not yellowy. They're much whiter. That is what it is. Again, you are paying a lot less. So some of these details you have to sort of put to one side, you know, certainly from a distance, but even when you're playing it yourself, you are not going to be thinking about that. The binding all around the guitar is good. It's not as good. There is a definite line there that you can see something is not as, I'm not sure that accurate's the right word, but you can just see a sort of, I don't know, it's like you can see a bit of gold paint from the top, but it is uniform all the way around, pretty much. It gets a bit wider here and there. It's certainly not that noticeable. In terms of the wood, I actually really like the dark reddish mahogany on the back here. Excuse me. This is a lot more natural looking on the Gibson, and I think that's just down to variance. I think you probably got different ones back then anyway. This is real wood. Yeah, they're both very attractive. The Gibson one has a tiny bit of a more interesting grain. It's quite uniform on this, but no, it's definitely a natural thing. Now, the other thing that surprises me is I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, this is nitro and this is poly. This feels really nice, this Epiphone. Now, they've both got a very high level sheen, which is probably very period sort of character specific, you know. These are thick, thick lacquer finishes. I'm not really thinking, oh, I mean, this one is a bit smoother. It's a little bit of a difference. It's not a huge difference, and if you've never played nitro, it's certainly not going to be something you think about with this Epiphone. I mean, the more I talk about it, the more I'm just thinking how good of a deal this was, really. You know, tiny bit of binding not being perfect. It's nothing. All the finishes, all the areas where they join on together are just perfect. And actually, they're not perfect on the Gibson. Now, I personally tend to be quite forgiving when it comes to things like that, especially if you bought something called a 50s Standard, or if I buy my R9, which is definitely made to look like, you know, it's been sitting around a while. These things were always made like this. That it's not that they used to be perfect and they're not perfect now. If anything, you're more likely to get more good guitars off the line now than you ever did before. So we should be happy with that. The places where you're going to feel the most difference are often in the sort of plastic materials. The shape of the selector switch is a tiny bit different. Again, it's not a big deal. The color is different. This has got that more dark yellowy gold on the Gibson, and this has got that cream like you'd get on a normal sort of burst pull. The poker chip is not as nice feeling on this one. It's a bit thinner as well, and the metal around it just feels a bit cheaper, but it all works. That doesn't feel like it's going to fall off or anything like that. And the button's good. It's you know, the strap button feels strong. It looks right. It's not huge. It's sort of a good shape. And I was trying to look for imperfections here because obviously everyone wants to know. And, you know, there's a couple of bits where it hasn't been cut out perfectly on this. It's a bit rough. That could have been improved. But other than that, it's a bit rough under this pickup. But then the R9 has that massively under this sort of pickup cover. One thing I don't like, but it's the same on the R9, is the amount of screws you get here. But that is the form of it. There's nothing else you can do about that. Some people might take this off. I might even have a go at taking it off on this one, which I haven't done on the Gibson. And then the knobs. The knobs they're nice. Again, they're a bit rough at the top, you know. They're not rough. No, they're definitely not rough on the Gibson one. So you know, you see those differences. But for the difference of a quarter of the price, what more can you say? You know, I'm sure the nut is not made of the same material. And it's sort of got a more clumsy plasticiness to it. And it's also, it's got some like scuff marks, but I feel like they've actually put some sort of pencil lead or graphite, you know, which you're supposed to in the nut. So that's quite interesting because you can see the sort of grey bits there. Right, so my verdict on that is, this is probably the best Epiphone I've come across yet. It is, for Epiphone, it's a bit more expensive. It's not in the 300 plus, it's in the 500 plus pounds. Everything is in order. Nothing has arrived sort of broken feeling. It's all pretty good quality. Where you'd expect some cheapness, you do get it around here, around the switches and things. You know, those thumb bleeders are pretty sharp. But the output jack is solid, the strap buttons are solid, and it feels nice. Just the neck is not as nicely carved. It's not as nice of a shape. But overall, I'd be very happy to suggest that you're going to love the look and feel of this guitar. So let's move on to the sound. Today I'm going to be playing through the lovely Sir Ombre, which is a small 18 watt tremolo amp. It's there to sort of mimic the brown face Fender era, the early ZZ Top sound. I really like it. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go from reasonably clean to reasonably not clean. On this guitar and the R9, there's no point playing the P90s. They will sound very different. So we're going to do very similar things on both guitars, hopefully. Let's just do a bit of sort of strumming and a bit of lead so you can see. Just tune that up again. Just to say, I change the strings when I get the guitar now. I've decided, rather than complaining about bad strings on a guitar that might have been sitting around for 6 months, just to change them, and then that's not a factor. But my rule with reviews going forward is I won't do any setup other than the strings. I'm not going to play with the truss rod or any other height, because a lot of people buying Epiphones, let's say, may be younger, they may not have as much experience, they're not going to do that themselves, and that should be something that you're told about. On this one, the height is actually pretty good. I haven't tested it with my gauge because it feels nice. It could be a bit lower, and I can play with that in future. So that's full volume on both. Let's go in the rhythm. Bridge pickup. Okay, so I'm going to switch back and forth now between the R9 and this one so that I keep the amp on the same settings, and we will see. What I'd say so far is they haven't just put any old standard pickups in here. They've put pickups that will have what seem like a very low output, which would be period accurate. These are the PAF style Epiphone pickups. So they're definitely not high gain. I was actually expecting it to look like a Goldtop but feel like a modern standard, so I'm quite happy with that. But we want to see what the volume difference is like as well between two guitars at the same level. So I'll start in the neck. And then the bridge pickup. And then in the middle. What I would say is there are quite a lot of similarities there. There's a little bit more, well, grit and grind in these custom buckets, a bit more creaminess. But it's not like they've just thrown any old pickup in the Epiphone. They've definitely tried something. Let's just hear that one more time in the middle. So these feel like they're lower output than the custom buckers. They're not overdriving the amp as much. When it's more overdriven, the Sir Ombre, when it's attenuated like this with an aux box, does get a bit flubby at the low end, which was happening with the R9. It's not happening with this one. These are really clear and clean. I feel like the R9 obviously is going for that late 50s PAF, and this is going for something a bit earlier, it feels like. Right, let's turn the amp up a bit. So that was at sort of 9 o'clock, and now we're at sort of 11 o'clock. I like this amp for it compresses, you know, nice and early. let's compare. Okay, I'm having great fun with both of these guitars, and you wouldn't have necessarily thought that a £500 Epiphone would give you so much fun in comparison to an R9. Let's whack this up to about 2 o'clock. It's starting to get a bit more sort of gritty, but it's really holding up well. It's got good, they've got good fidelity, the pickups. Right, let's go one more step up. onto the R9 for the last time, and then we'll play around with the pots on the Epiphone. There's a bit more high-end treble on this R9 than there is in that. So let's test out the pots. I always like to see sort of how sensitive and dynamic they are. Let's just do it pickup by pickup. So we'll start with the neck pickup. So this is at number 10. 9. 8. 7. 6. 5. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so it really goes down to nothing by 1, which is okay. Compared to the R9, the drop off is less gradual. It gets a bit cleaner, a bit more quickly than it does on an R9. It's definitely not bad. You just have less of a choice, I would say. So let's go for the other bridge pickup. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay. Cuts out even quicker, probably by about 2, but it does keep that grip for quite a long time. And we're only on sort of 10 o'clock on the amp here now. In the middle position, which is where I often play on a Les Paul, I tend to, on my R9, have the volume on the bridge at about 6, and the neck just comes down to about 8 or 9, 8.5. You can introduce more bridge, or you can take it away a bit more, and you can bring up the bridge and then take back the neck a bit. Wow, it's pretty impressive. Okay, so here's sort of my conclusion then. If I had £500 to spend on a guitar, 550 I think this would be my first choice. I don't think I've ever come across an Epiphone that's as good as this. There's a lot of attention to detail here. Let's start from the top again. The headstock shape has changed and it's great. It's not as nice as the Gibson one, but they had to keep a differential there. The taper could be a bit sharper and just give you a little bit of a thinner feeling up here, but it's not bad. The neck is not quite as carved. It's not as shapely. It doesn't have as much detail in it, and it's quite baseball bat-like, but it's definitely playable, and it definitely feels authentic. You know, this feels like it's made to be an old guitar. The actual production of it is really impressive. I mean, it feels and looks, you know, up to about here, it looks like a Gibson from the back and from the front. You know, there's a bit, they haven't sanded down and made this pickguard properly. That's probably the worst element on this whole guitar. It's been shaped slightly weirdly here. You probably can't see that. There's a bit of roughness around this pickup cover. This feels, it's nice and solid. It doesn't feel as cheap as some I've felt in the past, and it's probably better than the cheaper Epiphones that you can get as well. Still a bit of a cheap poker chip, and the knobs are a bit sharper and the thumb thumb bleeders are, they're about the same as on the Gibson. They're quite sharp. In the playing, it's hard to say whether they're low output because they're being authentic. Yeah, of course they are. That's what they're supposed to be, sort of probably those mid-50s PAFs. They're really low output, which is lovely actually, and it's definitely not just, oh, let's make a gold top, but actually it's just the same as the modern ones. This is a proper 50s type of guitar. You can tell that by the neck, you can tell that by the sound, which is going to make so many people so happy, because often with these sort of the second tier brand, you might even get the look and the style, but you don't get the sound, and that's so important. You know, if you want a 50s type guitar, then that's what you want, and they've given it to you, which is, in this day and age, actually something to be applauded from a company that's producing a second tier of guitar like this. I can't really criticize anything when it comes to the price. I was a lot more picky with the more expensive Gibsons, and sometimes they do let you down. You think, oh, that could have been a bit better. I mean, this is a lot of money that we're paying. But with the Epiphone, you've paid a lot less, and they're giving you so much that if there's the odd tiny little fault in something, you're going to be much less picky about it and just still enjoy the feeling of that guitar. So it to me is the perfect player's instrument in terms of gigging and going about and enjoying it in that sense, because yeah, of course it's not no money, but if it does get stolen or damaged, it's a lot less of a headache than if you take your R9 or even your Gibson Standard. And yet for the audience in front of you, the sound will be very good enough, more than good enough. And for the player, they've given it enough nuance to not just be a baseball bat with a sort of lifeless piece of guitar, you know, lifeless piece of wood. You know, they've made this feel like a real, and I don't mean to sound sort of derogatory there. This feels like a Gibson to me, which is astonishing, really. I'm very happy with it. I'm really happy to have it in order to play around with the pickups. I quite like these pickups, but you know, you can get better, of course, and that is not the most expensive thing to change. The pair of custom buckers that I bought secondhand were £300 for the pair, so the total spend would come up to $850. You're still not even half of the way to a Standard, and yet you've got better pickups than the Standard at that point. So, you know, the tuners work really well. The potentiometers in here are not as nuanced and good. I'm going to look into what you can do about that. Is it something I can change? And I'll let you know if I can. So his final thought is, if you want a good Les Paul, if you want a gold top, if you want a 50s type guitar, this is absolutely fantastic. You know, unless money is no object, I definitely wouldn't even look at the Gibson unless you really, really, really want a Gibson. This is a beautiful guitar. It's mind-blowing actually what they've done. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you got one of these? Are you looking to buy one? Have you got Gibson and Epiphone like I do? What do you think? Do you think they could get even better next year? What could they do about that? And yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to see what this sounds like with different pickups, please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a thumbs up, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Cheers.